Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. Today's guest is Derek Hartley of Portland, Maine. Derek chose to speak about July 26, 2017, better known as Powdered Night of the Baker's Dozen at Madison Square Garden. 2 nights of Phish's landmark residency have already been covered on Attendance Bias, so initially, I wasn't sure what else could be said, but immediately after emailing with Derek and he chose Powdered Night, I was brought back to the absolute splendor that was that show. Since it was played, I've always considered Powdered Night to be the best of the Baker's Dozen, musically speaking, and this was a great opportunity to hear someone else's view of it and to dig a bit deeper into what made it such a successful show. Derek is originally from northern Maine, and since he got into Phish right at the end of 2.0, he didn't have much opportunity to see the band live. But he and his wife took a fortuitous trip to New York City in the summer of 2017 to make up for lost time, and they were able to hit what was arguably the best 3 consecutive nights of the dozen. So let's join Derek to talk about calling songs during the dozen, Raspberry Beret, and the best beers in Maine as we discuss Phish's performance from July 26, 2017 at Madison Square Garden. Derek, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great, Brian. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I appreciate you coming on to talk about what, in my opinion, we'll get into this later, but in my opinion, is probably the best overall night of a legendary run. That would be July 26, 2017, otherwise known as Powdered Night of the Baker's Dozen at MSG.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But again, I do have attendance bias. So
I'd imagine anyone who was there would. Before we get to Powdered Night, let's talk about you. Let's hear about who you are as a fan from the Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Derek, when was your first Phish show?
So my first Phish show was November 29th, 2009 at what used to be the Cumberland County Civic Center in Portland, Maine. I got into Phish like right after they broke up. So like fall, winter of 2004, beginning of 2005, as I was starting to like, you know, when you hit that age in like school or something and you start seeking out music on your own, that's what I was doing. And first it was like classic rock and stuff. And then the next level after that was getting into the Dead and Phish. And I quickly, you know, got obsessed. And I was like, they were kind of the same in my mind because they were 2 non-entities, you know, like I could, you know, if I had parents that were more into jam bands, I could have, you know, gone and saw the offshoots. But to me, Phish and the Dead were kind of the same because they were both, you know, non-active. So when, yeah, and I was active on the message boards and stuff like that. So when the rumors started going around about them coming back, you know, after Brad Sand's wedding and stuff like that, I was like, so excited that I might get a chance to actually see my favorite band. And you know, of course they got back together and I listened to all the shows throughout the year in 2009, but it wasn't until they played the Civic Center. I was a freshman in college that I drove down with a buddy of mine and actually my aunt and uncle as well. So it was nice to finally be able to do that. And I didn't really have that moment that a lot of people do where they get it at their first show or their second show or something, because to me, I already got it. They already were my favorite band. It was just so great to finally see them live.
I had a similar experience with what you just said with getting it, where I first got into them, I'm guessing, depending on the years you just cited, at a similar age, like right when I was getting out of middle school or right when I was in middle school and then really digging deep in high school. Mm-hmm. I got it just from listening to A Picture of Nectar. And by the time I saw them live, I was already, I mean, there was so much more to experience, but the music I was already sold on. What was it that sold you? And how did you first discover them? Where did they come from? Because they're not mainstream.
Well, I think it came from I knew my uncle and his girlfriend at the time really liked them and talked about them in the same breaths as like the Grateful Dead, who I had kind of heard a little bit of through osmosis just from classic rock and stuff like that. I always liked like collecting things when I was a kid, and like baseball cards and stuff like that. So I feel like when I realized that you could kind of treat music the same way, and there are these bands out there where there was so much music out there to be able to listen to and like compare and contrast different shows, that just fed into it. My aunt and uncle, I kind of asked them where to start, and they were like, "Oh, a live one. That's like the first live album that they put out." So I bought that with my own money at like an FYE or whatever random like electronic CD store at the mall an hour away from my house. And it just completely blew my mind. And I mean, still most of those songs are some of my favorites, but really it was Slave to the Traffic Light, and especially that Harry Hood on Alive, which is still my favorite one. When I heard the peak of that for the first time, it just like ripped my brain apart. I was like, I didn't know music could be like this. That was it from there. Then it was downloading every show I could, buying every official release I could, and here I am.
Well, here you are. What was your most recent show? And what did you think of it?
It was Hartford back in July, the 24th, I think. My wife and I did both Mansfield shows and Bangor and Hartford. And Hartford was my favorite out of the four. It was really a great example of set list, not exactly being representative of the quality of the show, because you look at that show on set and you're kind of like, yeah, but you listen to it and you have like an 18-minute Sigma Oasis, you have that Wave of Hope, and a song I heard the Ocean sing to open the second set. And yeah, I was over the moon. Those are a couple of my favorite jams of the summer pretty easily.
So based on the shows and the venues that you've already mentioned, I have to imagine that you're either from or grew up in the New England area.
I actually grew up in northern Maine and went to college up there as well. So that's kind of why I've been into Phish for, a really well over half my life now, but I've only seen them 24 times now, just because of growing up and going to college where I was. It's a haul. It's, from my college, it's like 4 hours to get to the Mansfield Amphitheater, I think. And I didn't have a crew of Phish fans or Phish friends or anything like that in college. I had one good friend of mine that liked Phish, and we went into Portland, we went to Augusta in 2010 and Bangor in 2013, but we couldn't like get the crew together to like go get a hotel and see a bunch of the Northeast shows. So it wasn't until my wife and I started dating in 2016 that we really started seeing chunks of shows on a regular basis.
Too bad you don't have a time machine. You can go back to the mid and late 90s to their festivals in Limestone. You'd be right next door.
It's so funny because that's when people find out that I like Phish, the most random people in my life will be like, "Oh yeah, I went to one of those festivals." Like somebody that just kind of went for the vibes, went because that was the most happening thing in Maine that weekend, in 97 and 98 or 03, that was the big thing. So I know so many people that I've met that their one and only time seeing Phish is going to like Lemon Wheel or It or something like that. And I'm just like, oh, it's kind of funny because at least we have that to sort of connect on. And then I'll be like, oh yeah, I really, really love the Waves from It. And they're like, what are you talking about?
What is something you must have on you when going to a show?
Well, for me, it's walking up to the lot or walking out of the lot with a craft beer, walking up to the venue. I live in the Portland, Maine area right now, and we have lots and lots of great beer. So we always have a cooler stocked absolutely full when we travel to shows. So that's one of my best things. My favorite things is drinking a nice cold IPA on the walk up and the anticipation starting to grow.
I always associate Maine beer with Allagash. Mm-hmm. Give us some recommendations. What are some good craft breweries that come out of Maine?
So Allagash is a good one. Allagash and Maine Beer Company are usually the two that you'll probably hear most. My favorites are Bissell Brothers. That's another one that's talked up a lot. And it's right at the Thompson's Point venue, which is right there on the water. It's a nice outdoor amphitheater that's really just a stage on a patch of grass. Trey played there last September, and it was just a gorgeous place to see a show. So Bissell Brothers is right there. Oxbow is probably
Oh
my
yeah.
favorite. Yeah, they got lots of different styles of beer, a lot of like farmhouse, like aged stuff, and that's really good. And the one of the under the radar ones that I like is Bellflower. That's a brand new one to Portland, and that's a really good one if you come up here.
All right. Well, either I'll come up there, or hopefully they're successful enough, it'll come down here to me. Speaking of food and drink, what is the best meal you've ever had on tour or outside a show?
I would probably say, actually, during our Baker's Dozen trip, we were just, walking around New York City, and we saw like a Indian place that was like kind of looked like a hole in the wall type of thing. And we were like, oh, let's give it a shot. And we went in there and just had a delicious meal. My wife told me, though, that doesn't really count because we were touristing around New York City. So
It counts. It counts.
that's probably what I would say. But for a more like general sort of thing, when we went to Chicago in 2018, Portillo's, the bang for your buck that you get for that place, a couple dollars for probably the best hot dog you're ever going to eat. I mean, you can't really go wrong there.
I don't know your wife. You and I just met literally 10 minutes ago, but I would suggest, being a New Yorker myself, that going into a hole in the wall Indian place makes you more New York and less touristy, because all the tourists would go to the well-known places.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes
So
sense.
I got
we
your
did hit a
back.
few of those. Thank you. I appreciate that.
What is your most controversial Phish opinion?
I don't really know if it's that controversial anymore, but going back to what I said before about Hartford, like I would always rather listen to a show that has big jams coming out of weird songs or different places than like a show full of heavy hitters that are just like pretty good to not an outstanding version of that particular song, whether it's Tweezer or Yem or whatever. I would rather hear the weird stuff, the 25-minute Wave of Hope or something like that. That is something that gets me a lot more excited in nowadays, at least.
Yeah, I was going to say, as you were speaking, this summer 2022 was very good to you and that opinion.
Yeah, and I think it says a lot about how they view the newer material, that they're willing to do stuff like that with it. And some people, you go on Twitter sometimes and you see that people are like, yeah, but the set list, but it's like, okay, you have 2 minutes of that song or 3 minutes of that song. And a lot of the newer songs are like that, where it's, a couple minutes and then they're already in the jam, and then it goes off into the stratosphere. So some people I feel would say that that's pretty controversial, but I'm in it for the jam. So
Well, it's funny because the other night I saw Trey at the Beacon Theater, just solo acoustic, and he plays a ton of songs in one set. And you realize when he plays those songs, because he doesn't really jam much, it's just literally him, a guitar and a microphone. He has his looping pedals and everything, but he plays for the songs. So you realize how many Phish songs are really just like 3.5 minutes or shorter. And it doesn't matter what the jams are in that circumstance. You kind of either get the value, if you value it, or the disposable part of the song, whether you like it or not, your opinion. But yeah, you get, like you just said, you get 2.5 or 3 minutes of the song, whatever that song may be, like Leaves at Jones Beach.
Yeah, exactly. Or anytime like Ruby Waves is always the one that I sort of go to, is like it really seems that those two verses are gone in a flash, and then it's like, then that song can go anywhere. Or Soul Planet, which that might be my most controversial opinion, is that I am a huge Soul Planet fan, big Soul Planet defender, has one of the highest batting averages of any song since it's been debuted.
Well, that last part is inarguable. It does have probably the highest batting average. And finally, what is the weirdest thing you've ever seen inside or outside of Phish Show?
I feel like I've been kind of blessed or maybe cursed in that I don't have one of those moments that's like that you're going to talk about for years and years. Remember when we saw this at X concert, but I will say that this year we were kind of terrified when we saw somebody had brought their toddler to the show, and they had them in one of those backpack like holders, and it was as if the kid wasn't even there at all. They were moving in a way that I did not think was probably good for that child. So that's probably the thing that comes to the mind right now.
When was this show played?
So Powder Night of the Baker's Dozen, when you chose this night, I had kind of mixed feelings initially, like right away, because guests have gone over July 30th, 2017, Jimmy's night with my friend Dave Berland. And we've also gone over August 6th, the end of the Baker's Dozen, the Glaze night with Jason Gershony. And also I spoke to recently Andy Michaels of Jemp Radio about Simple, not from the Baker's Dozen, but from Northerly Island, the same summer tour. So when you picked this, I was thinking to myself, well, how are we going to do the context section? Because I've already gone over the Baker's Dozen. I've already gone over summer 2017. It's been covered pretty well. So any fans listening right now, you could, if you want to deep dive into the Baker's Dozen, you could either check out either of those episodes, or I would recommend checking out the Undermined podcast from Osiris Media, who did a whole season about the Baker's Dozen, which was very well done, different in style than Attendance Bias. But also, if you want to go deep into what the Baker's Dozen was, what it meant, you have your resources. But for this show, I think it's important to focus on the context within the Baker's Dozen that Powdered Night was played.
Yeah.
Because I don't think, and tell me what you think, in my opinion, you can't really talk about Powdered Night unless you acknowledge Jam Night, the previous night, the 25th of July.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. Especially because, and I know we're going to get into it, but the relatively unassuming start to Powder Night as opposed to Jam Night. And Jam Night was actually my first night of the Baker's Dozen. Of course, we only did 3 shows. We did Jam Night, Powder Night, and Chocolate Night, which, I mean, I don't think I would be able to pick 3 in a row that I would have preferred to go to if I was only going to go to 3. Jam nights really seemed like the other nights were really good. I'm a big fan of Red Velvet. I love that second set. I think it's very, very well played and honestly kind of thematically related to the second set here, in that I wouldn't put any of the single jams on like a pedestal, but as a whole flowing set, it connects really well. But Jam Night was my first night of the Baker's Dozen. It seemed like things were really going to pop off after that show. That was like, okay, here, we're in it now. This is really what's going to happen. Anything can happen any night.
Yeah, that's the vibe I got too. You just said it perfectly well. Powdered Night, I just said, was kind of the best night of the Baker's Dozen, musically speaking. On the flip side, it didn't have like the shock value of Jam Filled, where there's Sample in a Jar that lasts 12 or 10 minutes, or Lawn Boy that goes for a half hour, or the bust out of End of Session in the second set, stuff that makes for what I might call an all-time great show. But I don't think that the musical accomplishment of Powdered could have happened without the turning point of Jam Filled Night, because after Jam Filled Night, all the cards were on the table from Phish. I mean, we couldn't have predicted everything, but we did know now any song is liable to be jammed out. Any song is liable to be played, even if they played it once on New Year's Eve, 1998, specifically for that. We'll get there. But everything was on the table, because leading up to the Baker's Dozen, or leading up to Jam Filled, the Baker's Dozen was still kind of new. Like fans were still learning all the different corners, how early you had to get in to get a donut. Like for powdered, we'll get into it in a second. What counts as powder? Yeah. Like how strict of an interpretation is each night going to be thematically? Jam Filled told us any song could be jammed anytime, anything at all from the entire Phish experience could be played. And even though we know Phish, we don't know anything.
Yeah, that you're completely right there, and that was sort of my thoughts going into it as well. And the second set here, plus the tube, plus the encore, is really special to me. It's probably my favorite show I've ever seen. If I had picked like my favorite moment from the run, I would probably pick the Sample in a Jar opener when they drop of Jam Night, when they drop into the jam and the rising crowd of everybody realizing what's happening, like, oh, this is what they mean by Jam Night. And then after Lawn Boy, when everybody started to rush to the bathroom during My Friend, and everybody's high-fiving in the line that over what we just saw. Or if I'd picked my number one favorite jam, probably the best jam I've ever seen, it would be the 728 Chalk Dust. But there's just something about this show, and certainly we're going to get into it, that this is the one, above the others in my mind and above any of the other shows that I've seen, as like the one that I wanted to talk about.
Well, let me ask you, before we get into White Winter Hymnal, what led you to the Baker's Dozen? Where were you in life? You said you saw 3 shows. Who were you in 2017 in July?
So when the dates got announced and there were no other Northeast shows other than the Baker's Dozen, my wife and I, girlfriend at the time, we hadn't ever been to Madison Square Garden or anything like that. And, here's this dates. We're like, oh, well, let's take a week off and let's see what we can hit. And so we picked this week in July, just kind of like randomly looking at the dates. And we're like, okay, we could do Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday shows. That's perfect. We could stay 4 nights. We'll have a night off in the middle. And go. So this was my first time to New York City in like a lot of years, probably 10 years or so, and my first time ever going to Madison Square Garden. And we didn't really have things planned other than, of course, that we were seeing Phish. So it was nice to sort of be like, okay, we're going to be stationed in the same city for a number of days. We're just going to wander around. We're going to see all of what's going on in the Phish world, and
go to the best Indian restaurants you can find.
Exactly. And all the different events that were going on, and find some places to hang out. So, and when we actually took the train in from Boston, we drove to Boston, took the train. And when I came up from underground and was under that giant Baker's Dozen banner, the very first thing we did in New York City was my wife taking a picture of me under the banner with my hands in the air, like just so excited. So it was really cool, to finally make it to MSG and for it to be this.
Hi everybody, Brian here to welcome you to the set break of today's episode of Attendance Bias. First, thank you for listening. And second, just a quick reminder to tell you that even though Attendance Bias comes to you for free, it does take a lot of work and it does take quite a bit of money to keep the lights on here at production. So I just wanted to ask a small favor if you could support the podcast in any number of the following ways. If you could leave a review or a rating of it on whichever podcast app you use. If you could spread the word, telling a friend or someone you think may be interested in it about it. Or probably the most concrete way is to go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate however much you can financially to help with the continuing costs of Attendance Bias. So thank you again so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the second half of today's episode.
Set 1.
The show opens with White Winter Hymnal, and admittedly, I would guess, I know myself, I would guess for most people, I had no idea what was being sung. I had heard of Fleet Foxes. I had never actively listened to them. I did know what it was. And I like it more the more I listen back to it. It's actually very close to the original recording. It sounds spot on. And the first thing I realized when I listened back and heard the lyrics, I didn't realize this in real time, but the band were really showing that they could define powdered however they want, because the lyric says white snow as red as strawberries in the summertime, which has this double entendre of it's summer, right? It's July in New York City, but the white snow is obviously a reference to powder.
Yeah, I did not know that it was a Fleet Foxes song or what it was until I checked Twitter. But I I'm one of those people who, like, I try absolutely to not even touch my phone during shows. So it was really a big deal for me to not know what song it is and then have to look up on my phone. But my wife was like, I think this is a Fleet Foxes song.
Oh,
And
point
that's
for her.
that's out of my wheelhouse. So I did not know, but I felt like re-listening to it, you can really tell that they were practicing their vocals, because that you can pick all four of their voices out and they sound really, really good. This is one of those a cappella songs that sometimes they have those a cappella songs that really click, or you could tell that they really rehearsed it beforehand. And I thought they sounded excellent.
Following the pack, all swaddled in their coats, with scarves of red tied round their throats, to keep their little heads from falling in the snow. And I turned round and there you go, and Michael, you would fall and turn the white snow red as strawberries in the summertime.
I do, looking back, also love that, they did cover a Fleet Foxes song. I love their alt or indie rock covers a lot. And I really like when they introduce stuff like that. I kind of wish they would do it a little more often, but, I'm waiting for the King Gizzard cover. So hopefully that will come. Maybe during the Trey and Goose tour, we'll see. But I hope so.
After White Winter Hymnal was Cars, Trucks, and Buses, which this is where I realized everything was being played at kind of a slower tempo, which befits this song, I think. When you get a little bit of a bop and jazz, it allows space for each instrument to kind of breathe. And I loved it. I have a sentimental connection. This song was played at my first show, so they could play this at every show as far as I'm concerned. But it also, the slow tempo that pervades this whole show, plays to the fact that this is a residency. That is, we're not in a rush to get anywhere. We still have, I don't know at this point, 6 more shows to go. Let's take our time. Let's stretch out.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. I like that it was at a little more relaxed pace. I do like Cars, Trucks, and Buses as a like a proper opener after an a cappella opener. I've actually seen it that way a couple of times at my shows, and I feel like it's a nice way to sort of ease you away from the a cappella, which isn't necessarily super common, into the, like, okay, now we're in more of the Fishy realm. So and it's a song that they don't really need a lot of practice to really nail and kind of get loosened up with. So that's another reason I like it early in the show like that.
I agree, because it's mostly vamping, except for Page when he takes his solo. And so it's, for lack of a better word, like you said, it's kind of easy, or at least easy for the band to ease in to the show proper. The next 2 songs are pretty pedestrian in terms of how they're performed, My Soul and Roses Are Free. I thought it was funny when they played My Soul. I looked it up because I got into Phish. My first show was in '97, and that was when everyone was sick of My Soul. They couldn't stop playing it. And it was so overplayed back then. But since 2013, it's been like once or twice a year. And now we're back in 2022. As of today, this is before Dick's. It's already been played 5 times.
Mhm.
And people are complaining about repeats. So My Soul is either all or none. And Roses Are Free, you know what you're getting. It's a good sing-along. It's fun. It's extra fun if you're a fan of Ween. Both of these songs were, like I said, pedestrian, work a day, get through the first set. Before, one of my favorite parts was the very long fuse.
Yeah, me too. I will say I forgot to add that if you listen really closely, you can hear Trey start the My Soul riff a couple of times before Cars, Trucks, Buses. So they sort of must have called an audible there and swap places or something like that. I did really like Trey's ending solo to My Soul, but Roses, yeah, it was sloppy. If there was any time to bring back the Roses jam, it would have been there, and that would have been very nice. But Very Long Fuse, that's one of my favorite songs from the Thrilling Chilling Halloween set. I wish they would play it more often. That and The Birds are the two that I really love. So I was I'm not really much of a song chaser, but I was really excited to hear that and hear it opened up a little bit. It didn't get quite like jammy, but they vamped for a while, and it was in just like a nice type 1 space. The ending wasn't quite put together, but the re-entry into the ending I thought was cool and how they got there.
Yeah, well said. It's this version of the Very Long Fuse is 8 minutes long.
Yeah, I was surprised when I was at work when I was listening to the show for the first time, and I was kind of surprised when I looked down at the when they got back into the song. I was like, how long was that? 8 minutes? Wow.
The next song, I think, Gumbo, was kind of a preview of what was to come in the second set. Knowing what they've played and knowing what's coming, I listened to this first set in kind of a different lens, where Gumbo, it's a typical laid-back jamming, about 4.5 minutes, but then Page teases a synthesizer at about 5 minutes and 15 seconds, just poking out there, just like dipping his toe in the water with the synth, and it changes the whole complexion of the song.
Yeah, completely. I felt one of the notes that I took was that it felt like they walked right up until the edge of a cliff of a jam and then decided to step back a little bit, because it really felt like any of them could have taken one small step further and then we would have been fully in type 2 territory. But for a nice set one version, it was really nice. It's almost a 1.5, type of jam.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I wish they stuck with it more. The next one is not my favorite. I'm waiting for the guest who has the controversial opinion that Yarmouth Road is a good song. Is it you?
No, it's not me. I'm sorry. I talked about this when I was on HF Pod for the Hartford show, but Yarmouth is not my favorite song, and it seems to follow us along quite a bit. And especially now that Mike has a song that I really do love in Mull, to get the Yarmouth Road instead of the Mull at Hartford was not very, not my type of a song selection. But here, back when there was no Mull, you get the Mike song and there you are. I will say, in the brief little solo section, there was some good Trey and Mike interplay there going on, maybe foreshadowing a little bit what was going to come in Character Zero later on.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and after Yarmouth Road is Pebbles and Marbles with a very short introduction. I use this word that was invented by The Simpsons. I wrote that it's a perfectly cromulent run through of the song. Nothing blew me away. Nothing disappointed me. It was very exciting in the moment. Don't get me wrong, but listening back, it was good. Good job.
I have a soft spot for all the 2.0, so to speak, because when I was getting into Phish and downloading shows and stuff, it was a lot of 2.0 because I wanted to listen to the most recent stuff. So I have a soft spot for all those songs. So anytime Pebbles pops up at a show I'm pretty happy about it. And this was a good run through with some good Trey in the solo. Would have been nice to get the jammed Pebbles, but that's a very, very rare occasion. So
I love that you have a soft spot for it, because I feel the exact opposite about the same batch of songs. Because I was bitter at Phish at around the end of 2003 and 2004, because I was so excited to see them. They were back. I was either in or had just graduated from college. I was in my prime going to show time of life where I could just toss off any sort of part-time job or school responsibilities and hop in the car and go. And they were delivering garbage for about a year and 2 months or so. I would say starting in November 2003 with their 20th anniversary tour. If 40-year-old me could go back and talk to 21-year-old me, I would say save the money, listen to it afterward. So songs like Waves or Pebbles and Marbles. I've always liked 46 Days, but Walls of the Cave, a lot of those songs, I could take them or leave them, mostly leave them.
I like them all. So that batch of songs, you are right, about late 2003 to 2004, outside of the Spag shows and that Mansfield show with the AC/DC bag and birds that are really good. But yeah, I do like summer 2003 a lot. I'll probably mention that again here in a few minutes, but I like summer 2003 a lot.
Well, coming back to 2017, after Pebbles and Marbles, they played Farmhouse, which everyone needs to go to the bathroom all of a sudden. I like this version of Farmhouse. I think the slower tempo that they've been playing this whole show benefits Farmhouse very much. It's almost like a singer-songwriter performance.
Yeah, and they've continued to, at least the shows that I've been to where they played Farmhouse, they kind of give it that same softer sort of treatment. They definitely did that at Dick's last year, and in Hartford this year also, where they really bring down the dynamics of it and let Trey really shine in that solo. And sometimes you don't need a jam. Sometimes you just need a nice, beautiful melodic guitar solo, and it hits the spot. And this would be, if I'm going to hear Farmhouse at a show, I would like it mid first set, around Nothing Else, that type of thing.
And to end the set already is, in my opinion, one of the best jams of the whole Baker's Dozen. 13 shows. If I were to create, I know Phish did, but if I were to create a best of mix, because people still make mixtapes in my world, but if I had to create a 90-minute mix, about 14 minutes of those 90 would be this tube. I think it's outstanding. One of the best jams of the dozen. This is where Page's synthesizer from Gumbo comes back in and says, I wasn't just teasing. Now I'm ready to move forward.
I love jams where Fishman is kind of the bedrock, and like in 2001 or Tube, where everybody else can be off doing completely different things, but you still know what song it is because Fishman's playing the Tube beat to it. So it's like him just doing that and driving the jam in that way and like being like, okay, I'm always going to be here for you guys. You guys do whatever you want. That always gets me. I really like jams like that. So him being able to do that and keeping it grounded so you can still tell that it's Tube, even though nothing that anybody else is playing would indicate that.
My favorite part of this is around 9 minutes, there's what I call the police siren effect. And it's different from the jam siren. It's a different sound. But to me, it sounds like a police siren. It is Trey. It's these long kind of shrieks, but shriek isn't even the best word. And it goes for about 2 minutes straight, which when we talk about it, doesn't sound like a lot of time, but in the moment could be forever. He plays this police siren, and as he's repeating it, the crowd starts rolling. You hear people gradually cheer louder and louder, and it spreads throughout the garden, and more people cheer. And then the band starts building upon itself to a peak. But it's not, I mentioned 46 Days just a minute ago. It's not a crazy top of the mountain, thunderous rock and roll peak. It's like a very organic slow burn peak that reaches a high plateau and holds it for a while. It's tantric Phish.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you want for like a jam set closer, which jam set closers, that gets extra points from me anyways. Like there's nothing like finishing a set with a jam and walking off like, yeah, we just did that, you know. That's always great. And sometimes even though technically it might be more minutes of music, sometimes it's better to just do that rather than cap it off with a cavern or whatever else set closer that they might throw. And not that I don't like those songs, but sometimes it's cool to make that statement of. And I feel like the tube was definitely the statement here, and that was really where I felt that it picked up from the jamming of the night before.
Set 2.
And the second set opens with Carini, and this is almost hard to break down song by song. To me, this is one giant 90-minute chunk of music with song portions here and there, almost like a giant brownie pan with a couple of walnuts somewhere sprinkled around, just like little places to grab onto. And before we go over it song by song, just FYI, it's Carini, Mr. Completely, 1999, Steam, No Quarter, and Character Zero. So it's 6 songs. And only one of them, I would argue, Character Zero, is kind of the only standalone.
Yeah.
The rest of them just kind of flow into one another. This Carini is a great way to open the second set. It's a little loose, which I guess is kind of the name of the game of the Baker's Dozen. Nothing has to be tight. Everyone's coming anyway. Phish will be here for the next 3 weeks. Why get everything perfect? It's a little bit of a messy jam. And when I say messy, I don't mean that as an insult, but it does lack the direction and patience of Tube. It's a little bit more all over the place. What did you think of this Carini to get things started?
Yeah, I felt the same, that it's not really necessarily anything special. It's them kind of stretching out their legs. A Carini set 2 opener is one of the best or most exciting slots of any particular song in the catalog. It's maybe not quite a Tweezer set 2 opener, but it's like up there, for like, okay, we're in it now, let's go. I agree in that it did seem kind of searching. They weren't really necessarily, it wasn't like bad or anything like that. It's just like, okay, we're going to take the time here. We're not going to cut this off early, but we're also not, we don't really have the ideas to sort of jump around right now. But then Fishman comes in with the Mr. Completely drum beat, and then it's like, okay, I was so stoked that they had brought Mr. Completely back at I think it was the Pittsburgh show. Because I love that the July 15, 2003 Mr. Completely is so good. And that's a jam that I listened to a ton in my early Phish days. And so I was so excited when they brought it back at that Pittsburgh show. And I was hoping to hear it at one of our shows. And for them to be in the middle of a jam and Fishman to drop that drum beat, because there aren't too many drum beats that, Fishman can lead the segue into.
I agree.
But for that, that was so great. And then it seemed like him doing that is what sparked a little more inspiration from everybody else, because then over the next 3 minutes or so, Fishman keeps switching back between just doing a normal beat on the ride and the Mr. Completely drum beat, because nobody else is done with the jam yet and isn't ready to move it in. So
although Trey does start building a melody, though. Trey plays this like creepy, not quite sinister, but almost childlike, creepy melody, very high pitched on his guitar. And when Fishman plays the, like you were saying, the Mr. Completely drum beat, Trey sticks to it. And when Fishman stops, Trey goes away. He does something else more atmospheric and ambient. And then when Fishman comes back with the Mr. Completely drum beat, Trey goes back to that melody. So it's, I don't think it's any stretch like you what you said, that Fishman's tightness and his cornerstone lets the band get a little bit tighter too. And what you called it about 13 minutes, when Fishman speeds up into the Mr. Completely beat, it's the turning point of the set.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. That was in what you were saying, the almost eerie sounding Trey lick that he plays as Fishman's getting into that. It's like, it's not quite a Mr. Completely tease, but it kind of is that vibe almost of like that. I don't even know what type, how you would explain that riff that is, the song, but it is kind of like the same thing. I'm not really a music theory person, so I don't know. It's not like quite an ascending thing, but you know what I mean. Anybody who knows the song knows what I mean. And like what he's playing in that jam it's not the same thing, but it's kind of reminiscent about it. So you could like easily take that bridge over there.
And it began the other side of the bridge within a few seconds, because they drop into Mr. Completely, which is a perfect segue. Yeah. Like Fishman doesn't stop. And then when you're listening to it, it sounds like a magic trick. But when you're there, you see them all make eye contact with each other. And Trey, almost with his whole body, counts into the drop into Mr. Completely. And this is where I noticed the first time of the whole show, the pocket from Phish and Mike is rock solid. This is a straight rock song, and they're really like picking out tiny medleys here and there. It's a perfect combination of jamming with a solid rhythm backbone. I love this.
Yeah, me too. And I really liked when they get into that major key space. And all right, so like around 9.5 or 10 minutes when Fishman starts throwing in the drum fill again. And that's when I'm just like pumping my fist, like, yeah, because they could still be jamming and Fishman can be reminding you of, hey, this is what song we were actually in. I do also like that they end up, not building from that and finishing the song. And again, Fishman throws in those licks a little bit later in the set too, and they just like didn't complete the song. They just are like, okay, we're gonna keep going. But I don't know if that was more Fishman because he likes the drum beat and thinks it's fun rather than trying to bring them back to the ending. But I did enjoy that.
I think it is. It's a really fun beat. It is.
Certainly, it's fun to hear.
The Garden is rocking off the charts by the time they get toward the end of Mr. Completely. And then right in line with the sample in a jar moment that you mentioned at the beginning of our talk, right in line with every bust out ever, right in line with the raising the banner at the end, they segue into 1999 by Prince. For the second time, the only time to that date, I should say, since New Year's Eve 1998. And I remember this as the peak moment of this show. I remember where I was. I remember what it looked like. I remember the way I felt, because it's the sort of feeling when a song that Phish played, you love hearing them play it, but it's always been through tape. It's always been through a moment that you were removed from, and now you're in it. It makes you truly feel like you're in something historic, at least within this closed world.
Yeah, certainly. This was probably, outside of when I finally got The Lizards, which is my favorite Phish song. This is probably my favorite moment of getting a song and being in the moment, like freaking out about it. Because I'm a humongous Prince fan. He's one of my all-time favorites. I knew that Phish had played this once on New Year's Eve '98. I knew they played Purple Rain, but I mean, they kind of treat it as a joke because it's a Fishman Vacuum song. But I loved that New Year's Eve '98 performance of 1999, and I listened to it often. And at jam night, of course, everybody's calling songs. And that night, the two songs that I had called were Raspberry Beret, because on the thing it had said raspberry jam filled, in the description of the donut. I was like, oh, maybe they'll play Raspberry Beret. That and Mountain Jam were the two ones that I had called. They didn't play either, but the outro, the walkout music at jam night was Raspberry Beret. And I was like, that's kind of funny. They're playing a joke. So I was not expecting 1999 at all. I did call one of the Powdered songs, as I'm sure a lot of people did, and that ended up being my only successful call of all the Baker's Dozen, I think. But 1999 was such a huge surprise, and I was like full on jumping in the air, freaking out, like, my team just won the Super Bowl right now. Like, I can't believe that I get to hear them play a Prince song. And then not only that, but to hear them jam it out and it be a very, very good jam after that. Yeah, 1999, I would say, was pretty easily my highlight of the set there. And also upon re-listen, if you count the jam, which of course you have to count
Of
the
course, it's the I think it's the jam of the night. I think it's a toss up between this and Mr. Completely.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And in the tube also, that's a pretty good top three.
I was going to say, yeah, for this tube to come in third of a single show, I mean, you're batting 1,000. After 1999 ends, and this is a long trek, they land into Steam. And I don't usually think of Steam as a landing spot, but at this point it had to be.
Yeah, definitely. It was a great cool down. I thought, and right before that, too, Fishman throws in those Mr. Completely teases, so they could have gone into the ending for that, but instead they wanted to take it down, especially after a couple major key blissy sort of jams in a row. I thought the 1999 jam was sort of reminiscent of what the Chalk Dust jam is 2 nights later. That sort of Trey, repeating some phrases in this nice upbeat, happy, blissy space. I really enjoyed that, but I felt like that placement of Steam was awesome for it to okay, we're going to take this down a little bit. We're going to be in more of like a slinky, not quite dark sort of space, but we're going to bring it down for sure. And I like that they almost fizzled out there in the middle of the jam, and Trey kind of brings everybody back into the song. I did kind of wish they would have kept the soundscapeness going over that Fishman beat, because that was cool. And again, a little like foreshadowing, almost like a couple nights later when they do the song I heard the ocean sing at, was that Jimmy's night?
Which was fabulous.
I love that jam. I love those, like when they really get freeform and weird and stuff like that. And I like those type of jams. So I kind of, looking back, I was kind of like listening to it as if I wasn't there and didn't already know what happened. I was like, go, come on, but it was a good version of the song, and it, I liked where it brought the energy from there. Like, okay, we're just gonna dance.
Yeah, I did too. I agree with a lot of what you said. This Steam is, I put in quotes, much more searching than the other jams in the show. Not grammatically the best way to phrase it, but it really is. It's like you use the word atmospheric. It is. It's mostly noise. It's a soundscape compared to the structure. And you said the bliss peaks of the previous 2 or even 3 jams. Yeah. And if Steam was a landing point for 1999, No Quarter is a landing point for Steam, because it kind of, you talked earlier about a 1.5 instead of 2.0, right? Yeah. No Quarter kind of does that for Steam, where it's bringing back, because it's also the beginning of it especially is very atmospheric and very dark and noise based, but there's a song, it's good classic rock energy at the same time. So it's a great mix of both of the previous 2. It's like 1999, the vibe of it, plus the vibe of Steam equals No Quarter.
Yeah, certainly. I'm not a huge, this might be my new most controversial opinion. I'm not really a Led Zeppelin fan. But
you're full of controversial opinions today.
I'm more of like a Who, Rolling Stones, that type of classic rock guy. But I do like this song, and I especially like when Phish plays it, because anytime Page sings, gets extra points for me. I really like, especially the covers that Page sings. So getting to hear this was really cool. I remember being really excited whenever it was they broke it out. I think like 2012 or something like that. Was when they debuted it. I remember being excited about that, because like, oh, Page sung it, yeah, and I liked how they played it. So, and I felt the placement of it right here was absolutely spot on. The crowd, going nuts over it, because of course it's a big crowd pleaser. It's a big arena rock song in the world's most famous arena. Yeah. Like, how can
Led Zeppelin in Madison Square Garden.
Exactly. Led Zeppelin at Madison Square Garden. How can you go wrong? song there. So I really like the placement there. And I even liked how they continued to build on the arena rock after that. Like, oh, hey, you like somebody else's big arena rock song? Well, here's ours.
And to be noted, before we jump onto that, this set has 6 songs. On Phish.net. They add the jam charts. They kind of like shortly describe notable versions. No Quarter is the only song in this set not listed on the jam charts, which makes sense because they don't jam it out. But even this next song, the set closer, Character Zero, is on the jam charts, which is probably the most straightforward song they have by design.
Yeah, it's certainly up there. And what's the only version to really break through that? Like, it was at Hartford 97, that one that has a really long jam. Is that the only one that they've ever jammed? I think so.
I think so. It's like a really long one. Someone on this podcast talked about not the Character Zero, but the song that came after it. I'll do it in the fact check. I'll check it out. Character Zero had a fun, mostly Mike and Trey like standing in front of each other jam.
Yeah, and I really like that. I like that Page and Fishman just let the two of them, just do their thing. And it was so cool to hear them do that dual, or whatever you want to call it. That just the two of them to just play off each other, because they were probably feeling it. Like, they were probably knowing that they were crushing that set. And especially after a big arena rock song, like I said, like No Quarter, for them to, rather than just instantly go into like, okay, we're going to peak the heck out of this and close it out 5-minute Character Zero and we're out of here. They instead let it drop down so it could be the two of them to gradually build up to the big ending. And like I had said earlier, it was kind of, they were almost doing a small version of that in Yarmouth Road. Maybe that was what they were like, hey, that was kind of fun when we were playing off each other like that earlier. Let's do that again.
They couldn't go wrong.
Yeah, more likely it's probably just, the spontaneous mind meld that they have. But it was cool looking back and noticing that, upon re-listening to the show. But yeah, big Character Zero builds up to a big ending, some nice shredding, and fantastic set.
Yeah, well, probably overall the best of the dozen, but I'll leave that to other debaters. They go off and they come back for the encore. I'm going to guess this is your successful call.
Yeah, Powderfinger was the only song I called all Baker's Dozen, and I am completely okay with that because it's up there with Rhinoceros, in my opinion, as like the best one-timer that they've ever done. And I both yearn for them to play, well, both of those again, but also like at the same time, it's cool that it's like they did this one time and it was this good, and that's where and that's it, But with Phish, you never know. They've played 1999 twice since then. But yeah, this Powderfinger is so good. Trey is really, he muffs a few of the words, but he's really singing his heart out. And even though he's sticking to the melody of the song, like in his solos, he like his tone and everything is so good, and it hits me right in the heart. I love it so much. I've listened to this so many times. Definitely one of the best encores that I've ever seen, and it's just this one song.
Yeah, it's fun the grace that we give Phish as fans, and that in a Rolling Stone interview that I think was published the morning after the Baker's Dozen was over, he was telling the writer about how they picked whatever songs for each night thematically. And he mentions when they came up with the flavors and that lemon poppy was going to be a flavor, everyone assumed that they were going to play the lemon song.
Yeah.
By your favorite, Led Zeppelin.
I would have been okay with that lemon song. That would have been fun to hear Phish play. But.
And he said, no, he eschewed it. He said, it's a little too obvious. But when it comes to Powderfinger, you called it. I remember there was a guy a couple sections over who was yelling it as a prediction. They're going to play Powderfinger tonight. And he had no problem playing this. I wonder if it's the connection, the personal connection that Phish has with Neil Young, stretching back to the early 90s, where it's kind of, they could own this.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's a great point. And also it could be, personal connection to the song itself. Like, oh, I really want to play Powderfinger. So, so we're definitely gonna play that. But yeah, I was really excited that they had played it, and I think that they just nailed it. But I wouldn't necessarily be upset if they threw it in the rotation every once in a while, like sub this in for Loving Cup or something like that as an encore. I think everybody would be happy with that.
Derek, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today to talk about July 26, 2017, Powder Night of the Baker's Dozen at Madison Square Garden. If we haven't said enough about it already, 99 times out of 100, the best show of the best run, in my opinion. Well, I'm eschewing a lot of controversial Phish opinions here, being a real fluffer at this moment, but I don't care. Listening to the show so many times over the last couple days has put me in that mindset. But bottom line, thank you for coming on. Thank you for your great energy and wanting to talk about such a fun show.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Brian. You do a really great service with this podcast, and it's been great to listen to some shows that I've heard before in sort of a different light after like listening to the show and hearing someone's like personal thoughts about it. It's really cool, and I really enjoy the show. So thank you very much for having me on.
Not much went wrong today with our conversation with Derek, but just the same, I want to clear up any odds and ends with today's attendance bias fact check.
Attendance bias fact check.
Derek mentions that he got super excited when he heard rumors of Phish reuniting at Brad Sands' wedding. That event was on September 6, 2008, and the 4 members of Phish played Susie Greenberg, Julius, and Waste for the newly married couple. A short clip of Julius is available on YouTube. Just a recounting of the craft breweries from Maine that Derek recommends in case you're in the area. Allagash, based in Portland. Bissell Brothers, also in Portland. Oxbow, which is in Newcastle, Maine. And Bellflower Brewing, which is also in Portland. Derek gives extra points to any song that Paige sings and was super excited when the band debuted No Quarter. However, we had a little bit of trouble pinning down when the Led Zeppelin cover first appeared, with Derek guessing 2012. He was off by just a little, as Phish first played the song live on June 1st, 2011 at the Garden State Arts Center in Holmdel, New Jersey. Derek also brought up a version of Character Zero that has, quote, a really long jam, and correctly guesses that it was at Hartford in 1997. They jammed it for nearly 20 minutes. Attendance bias guest Ian Stone was recently on the show to talk about 2001 Into Cities that came after that version of Character Zero. And that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Derek Hartley for joining me today, Phish.net for its help with the fact check, and Phish.in for the recording used in today's episode. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show by leaving a rating and a review of it on your favorite podcast app. And of course, you can always support it financially at www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias. Every penny helps. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next week on Attendance Bias.